Every free agency period always has a couple of questionable contracts that are handed out. So today I want to talk about the 5 worst contracts that have been handed out thus far through free agency. Now I am making this video only a handful of hours into the free agency period, as it is only Wednesday, 3 days into this thing, so there's going to be some more contracts that are handed out. However, I think these contracts will probably stand the test of time of being contracts that I just don't like personally. And we're going to begin with Bryce Huff going to the Philadelphia Eagles on a 3-year $51 million deal. Now Bryce Huff as a player has been uber productive in the small amount of sample size we've seen from him. Last year he had 10 solo tackles, 5 assisted tackles, and 10 sacks. He had a PFF grade of 79.7 overall with an 86.8 pass rush grade. However, his run stuffing ability is about as bad as you'll get at the defensive end position. He has a run defense grade of 48.0. And while you're not paying him any sort of astronomical number, 3 years for $51 million is a decent contract. However, I would have just personally preferred them to just keep Josh Sweat and Haason Reddick and just kind of keep that boat going. There really weren't a ton of bad contracts handed out in this period, and I just really didn't care too much about this one. To pay him over $10 million, which puts him in an annual range of being about a top 15 edge rusher, when I don't think he's anywhere near that. I think as a pass rush guy, he's easily top 10 just based off what we've seen. Now I'm interested to see what his total snap count looks like with the Philadelphia Eagles. Are they going to use him as a 3-down guy? Are they only going to bring him in on obvious pass rush situations? I really wonder what that's going to be. But to me, for somebody who isn't going to be a 3-down defensive end, to give him $51 million is a little bit questionable. It's not the worst contract I've ever seen, but again, there really weren't a ton of horrible contracts that were handed out, so I wanted to include this one because I just personally don't find it to be that very good of a deal when you could have just paid Josh Sweat and kept Haason Reddick and make that work out. But granted, they haven't actually moved off of Josh Sweat and Haason Reddick, so assuming that one of those guys does leave, which if neither of them do leave, then that makes this one even more questionable, but assuming that one of them does leave, I don't really care for this contract all that much. Next up with my least favorite contracts, it's going to be going to DeAndre Swift on a 3-year $24 million deal. Now, salary cap wise, it's not the worst contract in the world. We're talking about a guy who's just coming off a 1,000-yard rushing season, so it does make sense for him to get a nice pay raise without it breaking the bank. I don't think Chicago paid this guy, too much. It wasn't like they gave him $12 million a year. He's not getting paid like a Saquon Barkley or anything like that. With that being said, though, it's just such a bizarre fit in my opinion. Yes, DeAndre Swift is a decent running back, but I just don't really like the fit down there in Chicago. The Chicago Bears already have a roster with guys like Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert, and me personally, I don't understand why you'd bring in DeAndre Swift when you already have a young guy like Roschon Johnson who you want to probably give more carries to. I understand Roschon Johnson isn't a Bijan or isn't a Saquon or anything like that, but DeAndre Swift isn't either. And now you have 3 running backs in what was already kind of a crowded running back room to begin with. Again, I don't think it's the worst contract in the world. It just is such a bizarre fit for a player who, in my opinion, is not that good of a running back. Last year via PFF, he had a 66.7 overall grade with a 72.1 rushing grade and a 52.8 receiving grade. But I also feel like if you just watch the tape, you would see a lot of moments where he didn't hit the hole effectively, or he missed a block here and there. He missed something here, you did something here. And when you're playing behind a Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, you're going to put up good stats. Hell, we just saw what happened to Miles Sanders, who's now in Carolina, who could potentially be cut off the team because of how bad he was last year. Now, I'm not predicting DeAndre Swift is just going to fall off a cliff because he still is a freak athlete who can do a lot of really good things. But for a guy who only averaged 4.6 yards per carry, I just feel like that number is going to go down astronomically behind a worser offensive line down there in Chicago. Not to mention, with Chicago potentially going out there and drafting Caleb Williams, you would imagine they'd probably want to find a every down, 3-down running back who could make garbage runs turn into an extra couple yards to make things easier on your rookie quarterback. I just don't feel like DeAndre Swift is that guy, whereas I think a guy like Roschon Johnson could be, and I'm afraid that now with DeAndre Swift, they're going to be taking away carries from the young Roschon Johnson. Next up, we go to a contract that was literally just announced like 5 minutes before I started filming. Calvin Ridley to the Tennessee Titans on a 4-year, $92 million deal. And boy, where do I begin on this contract? This is over $20 million per year, and it's going to pay him as if he's a top 10 wide receiver in the league. Now, granted, that could change once the contracts of CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson come up, so he might not be top 10 from there, but as it is right now, he is somewhere in that range. To pay a guy $20 million when he is almost 30 years of age and it's for 4 years is very questionable. For context, when this contract is up, he's going to be over 33 years of age, and while we don't know the exact numbers in terms of how much is guaranteed and if there's a potential out, to me, 4 years, $92 million is just a really bizarre offer. Luckily for Tennessee, you don't have to really worry too much about your salary cap because you are with a rookie quarterback like Will Levis, and eventually DeAndre Hopkins will be gone. And even though I think that receiving room is going to be really good next year with DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, once Ridley becomes that true receiver one, which I'm assuming will happen, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to pay him all that much, because he's not a receiver one in this league anymore. Like, he's a very, very, very good receiver two, but a very poor receiver one. Yes, I do think next year with DeAndre Hopkins, that receiving room is actually going to be pretty nice, but long term, it's such a bad fit for a horrible contract. Calvin Ridley last year just went over 1,000 receiving yards, and while I do think that he's going to be pretty close to 1,000 receiving yards for the next couple years, to pay a guy $20 million to maybe hit 1,000 receiving yards is very bad. And for Tennessee, I understand you have the money to spend, but long term, this is a very bizarre contract to go to a player who's very unproven. I understand there's not a lot of receivers out there who you'd probably want to spend a lot of money on, but why not go out there and try to get a T. Higgins? I know that he's up for trade right now, so why not go for him? To me, Calvin Ridley for $92 million is a astronomical number for a guy who I just don't think is worth it. Next up, I have a player who I actually really like the team he went to, and I actually really like the fit, but with the contract he got, it is just way too much, and that actually does follow suit for the next two players. We're going to start up with Gabe Davis going to the Jacksonville Jaguars for 3 years, $34 million. Again, I actually really like the fit of Gabe Davis in Jacksonville, because Jacksonville really needs a big body wide receiver who could stretch the field laterally, and that's kind of what Gabe Davis can do. Yes, Gabe Davis has his concerns with his inconsistencies, some of his poor route running ability, and just kind of a lack of explosiveness, but when you already have guys like Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne, and Christian Kirk, you really don't need that. But Gabe Davis to me is just not a wide receiver 2 in this league. It was proven down there in Buffalo, which was a system and a space that he should have excelled at, but he wasn't able to do it there. So what makes us think he's going to be worth that money down there in Jacksonville, where he's going to be playing with a worse quarterback in probably a worse scheme? I think at best, Gabe Davis is a wide receiver 3, which I do think he could play down in that role, but we're talking about a guy who you're paying over $10 million per year on to basically just kind of be a deep threat decoy at times. Like, you're not going to run screens to Gabe Davis, or you're not going to run design plays for Gabe Davis to get out open in space, because that's just not what he's good at. Yes, Trevor Lawrence can take a couple deep shots to Gabe Davis, and yes, he's going to make some explosive plays here and there, but you're paying him over $10 million to be somebody who you expect to get 700 to 1,000 receiving yards, and I just don't see Gabe Davis coming even close to that. Again, the fit and the player and the idea is there, but paying him $10 million to me is far too much for a guy who's only going to be used in special occasions. I understand Jacksonville, similar to Tennessee, needed to find some wide receiver help for their young quarterback, but this, in my opinion, was just not the right guy and not for the right amount of money. How much would I have personally paid Gabe Davis? I would have been comfortable with a 3-year, $24 million deal. I would have done that in a heartbeat for him, but 3 years, $30+ million where you're paying him a ton of money and there's not a whole lot of outs is very questionable. Again, Gabe Davis is a wide receiver 3 at best, in which I think he's a very good wide receiver 3, but for a team like Jacksonville to be paying him that much, it's very questionable. I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. I know the NFL season may be over, however, Underdog has plenty of ways to entertain us while we wait for the new season. You may not know this about me, but I am a massive NBA fan, and with Underdog's Pick'em games, I can earn some serious cash. Simply pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 player stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. I personally love playing these Pick'em games on game day to spice up my afternoon. And all you have to do is use the link in the description below to sign up today using promo code MetroSports, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100, as well as an instant Pick'em special. Check the map on the screen right now to see if your state qualifies, and I want to give a massive thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. But lastly, let's talk about a contract that completely blew me out the water. The player is really good and he's in a perfect situation, but that contract is massive. And it's going to be Robert Hunt on a 5-year, $100 million deal. Now again, Robert Hunt is a very good player who's been very good for the Miami Dolphins for quite some time. And last year, he proved it with a 77.1 overall player grade, with a 74.5 pass blocking grade, and a 75.9 run blocking grade. And while I do think he's going to fit in nicely with the Carolina Panthers, to pay him $20 million for the next 5 years is crazy. For context, he's getting paid more than Zach Martin, who is the best right guard in the entire NFL. Now, understand that Robert Hunt is a very good player who's relatively young, sitting around 27 years of age, but $20 million per year as an offensive guard to protect Bryce Young is ludicrous. Because as it is right now, is Robert Hunt the best guard in the league? Not even close. Is he top 3, top 5? Maybe you can make the case, but $20 million for a guy who's going to be around this team for a while, it still just baffles my brain that they would pay him that much money. Again, I understand, protect Bryce Young, give Bryce Young everything he needs to succeed. I'm totally down for that. And I even like the signing of Robert Hunt, but if they had got him for a 5 years, $85 to $80 million deal, I would have been a little bit more comfortable with that. And I think that they probably could have signed him for something along those lines. And while I don't know the exact numbers and breakdown as to how this contract is going to go down, with how much is a signing bonus and how much can be taken off the contract, and if they can restructure it in any sort of way. But as it sits right now, with the bare numbers that I am aware of, I just think that with the way Carolina's been handling their cap space situation has been a little weird. This is a team that just traded for Deontay Johnson, and I think they're doing a good job of surrounding Bryce Young nicely, but I'm worried that long term this could have effects on their whole entire roster long term, similar to how we saw happen to Miami, where they overpaid on guys like Xavier Howard and Teron Armstead and so on and so forth, and it really screwed their roster long term. Getting a guy like Robert Hunt, who I think is a good player who's going to serve a very good purpose for as much as they did, is a little bit questioned. Now before I head out, let's talk about a few honorable mentions for this video. I will begin with Leonard Williams getting a 3-year $64 million deal. Good player. $21 million is kind of crazy work for a 30-year-old player. Next is Tony Pollard to the Tennessee Titans on a 3-year, $7 million per year basis. I don't hate the contract, I just don't like the fit. I would have rather see Tyjae Spears really take in that role and not have anybody around him to take any sort of snaps away from him. And lastly, Chidobe Awuzie going to the Tennessee Titans on a 3-year, $36 million deal is a little bit too much for me. I like Chidobe and I like his fit in Tennessee. Paying a guy $12 million for someone who's gotten benched, has had some injuries, has had some bad moments, who's also almost 29 years of age, a little bit suspect. But if you have any other contracts that I missed out on this video, let me know in the comment section below. But I love you guys. Peace.